to relay the heartbreak of our teachers at Robb campus. I met with them this morning, but as I looked across that room, there was a group of heroes in that room. If it weren't for them, along with the law enforcement that came, that were willing to cradle their kids, get them out of the classroom when it was safe, when they were guided, and the trust our kids had in their teachers, that says volumes for our staff here in Uvalde. They are heroes. They did heroic things yesterday, and they are always very humble, but they are truly humble heroes. Yesterday, we lost 2 teachers. These 2 teachers, I would say, are the cornerstone of that campus to some great degree. They are 2 beautiful souls. They have taught on that campus for many years. They have kids in our district, and they poured their heart and soul into what they did in educating our kids in Uvalde. 19 students, 19 precious students who came to school yesterday to enjoy the day, to enjoy the award assembly. And as I look at their pictures, you can just tell by their angelic smile that they were loved, that they loved coming to school, and they were just precious individuals. This is a difficult time for everybody. We are hurting. We have been cut deep here in our community. We will move forward. It's going to take some time moving forward. While our faith has been shaken, we ask you to continue to pray for these families, these kids in our community, and our teachers. I am a product of Uvalde. I'm born and raised here. I've worked for this district for 30 years. I never thought I would be sitting in front of you doing this today. But please pray for our teachers, pray for our community, and we will move forward. Thank you, Governor.
Thank you. We'll take a few questions.
Governor, we've talked a lot about mental health, not talking about guns. Do you think 18-year-olds would imply perfectly in mind would you make these changes as far as gun laws?
So the ability of an 18-year-old to buy a long gun has been in place in the state of Texas for more than 60 years. And think about during the time over the course of that 60 years, we have not had episodes like this. And why is it that for the majority of those 60 years, we did not have school shootings? And why is it that we do now? The reality is I don't know the answer to that question. However, what I do know in talking to the leaders here, as well as leaders in other locations around the state, and that is one thing that has substantially changed is the status of mental health in our communities. What I do know is this, and that is we as a state, we as a society need to do a better job with mental health. Anybody who shoots somebody else has a mental health challenge, period. We as a government need to find a way to target that mental health challenge and do something about it. Director McCraw will have the best information on that.
We're in the process of doing the crime scene right now. The first one being the school, the second being the vehicle, and the third, the grandmother's residence. I can tell you where it's a detailed process, so I can't answer that. But for right now, we believe that all the children were shot and killed by Ramos.
Director, in terms of the perpetrators, social media and postings that have been reported and analyzed, you don't believe that there was any sort of a warning or any information that would indicate that he was posing some sort of danger, maybe not a precise danger to this specific school, but weren't there warning signs that were available on social media, maybe to the platform, maybe to people he was communicating with?
We did see some, and I think one was of a concern, and that concern was, relayed to allegedly, we haven't confirmed it yet, to someone in California who didn't report it. And we're in the process of working with the FBI right now to make sure she's interviewed and find out more about it. There may be other clues out there right now that we're not aware of. This is a preliminary part of the investigation. We're going to scour everything to find anything that what could have indicated in some way, shape, or form that this individual is a threat to the community.
But nothing had come to local law enforcement that they could have acted.
None at all. In fact, this is, we're astounded at the beginning of the investigation because there's usually something out there, but right now, it is as that reported on the timeline. If we find out something else, we'll provide that information.
What more can be done to assist school districts to operationalize these threats that the plans and hazard plans?
So I'm going to answer in part, but we also have the TEA Commissioner Mike Morath with us, who may be able to shed additional light. But here's the information that we know, and you pointed out SB 11. Listen, as you know, but others may not. People need to understand that in the aftermath of the Santa Fe shooting, I signed 17 laws to address school safety. And one of them dealt with threat assessment and preparation for threat assessment. And there are certain standards that schools are required to comply with to make sure that they are addressing threat assessments. I have no information as we speak at this particular time about the status addressing threat assessments. I have no information as we speak at this particular time about the status of this particular elementary school or the ISD about what the status was concerning threat assessments. However, to make sure that your broader question is answered sufficiently, Mike, you want to come up? The person coming up is Mike Morath, who is the commissioner for the Texas Education Agency.
So there's significant appropriations provided to ensure that the local school systems around the state have resources for this. One of the components of Senate Bill 11 was a school safety allotment. There was additional upfront funding for that. The Texas School Safety Center and our agency work in collaboration to provide technical assistance and training to school district leaders, counseling team leaders, others, to ensure that the threat assessment protocols and these procedures, including threat response plans and the operational multi-hazard plans, are practiced on a recurring basis. So there have been essentially fairly significant efforts to bolster those managerial practices and these detective or preventative practices in schools all over the state of Texas. We will continue to do more. After any incident like this, of course, you reflect on lessons learned to ensure that we can prevent this kind of situation in schools going forward.
Yeah, if I can just add to that.
One second. I'll call on you next. 1 second.
If I can just add to that briefly, in 19, the House and Senate worked together, put $100 million into trying to give the schools all the tools that they needed to try and protect the students. The Marshals program, the Guardian program to arm teachers where schools want it. We left a lot of those programs optional up to the parents and the school boards and the school districts. And they're doing the best they can. And you're always going to have, again, no matter what you do, there's going to be someone to find another area that's vulnerable. But the legislature did act. The governor signed those bills, but we can and need to do more. And in the area of mental health, we've also been working on that as well, but need to do more. We've got to, in our smaller schools where we can get down to one entrance. One entrance might be one of those solutions. If you had taken 3 more minutes to find an open door, police were there pretty quickly. But this school district has been doing a really good job in trying to protect their students. And those teachers died yesterday protecting their students. And this is a continued work for us.
Governor, you were at a political fundraiser in Walker County. Why did you not cancel that event? And your press office has stated that you plan on canceling all future political events going forward until further notice. Does that include the NRA convention?
So first, with regard to yesterday, and that is when I learned about the shooting that was taking place pretty much at that time here. On the way back to Austin, I stopped and let people know that I could not stay, that I needed to go, and I wanted them to know what happened and get back to Austin so that I could continue my collaboration with Texas law enforcement to make sure that all the needs were being met here in the Uvalde area. As far as future plans are concerned, listen, I'm living moment to moment right now. My heart, my head, and my body are in Uvalde right now, and I'm here to help the people who are hurting.
Director, can you confirm from the moment that the campus officers engaged with the gunman to how long was that?
I can't. It's going to be within a minute, like 40 minutes or something, within an hour. But I don't want to give you a particular timeline. But bottom line is that law enforcement was there. They did engage immediately. They did contain them in the classroom, and they put a tactical stack together, in a very orderly way, and of course breached and assaulted the individual. The initial engagement? No, I mean, it was just, it confronted him and wanted to find out, because he see the report, heard the accident, and was out trying to check on that particular crash when he saw it. So he followed him right in immediately, okay, and when rounds were exchanged. And of course, then also we had 2 Uvalde police officers previously described that went in and was involved in also the shooting with the subject and were wounded. And of course, they were also responsible for containing him in that area.
Go ahead.
Yes, sir. I don't know where he was in the community, but obviously in the Uvalde area, because they got there so quickly and in force. And of course, I'll let them answer that question. But they were there in force, and of course, they were importantly, they had some members of their tactical team there on the Vortex team, and they took the lead on that stack. But I'll defer to, I think I have a Border Patrol uniformed.
Thank you. So first off, the U.S. Border Patrol Del Rio sector has a station in Uvalde. So we have about 150 or so agents that are permanently assigned to Uvalde. We also have several agents in other stations that choose to live here in this community as well. So we had folks that came from off-duty. We had folks that came from training. We had folks that were in the field and responded. So a multitude, some 80 in total, Border Patrol agents responded. So as to where that particular individual came from, don't have that yet. The investigation will bear out, but we have a large presence permanently here in Uvalde.
Did you?
Not going to release his name just yet.
Go ahead. We began talking about it in there. I'll just tell you one thing that we talked about, which is something we've heard in some other regions of Texas also, and that is in approximately maybe as much as a 40-county region around the area where we gather right now. There is no mental health hospital, and there's a shortage of beds for mental health in this region. If someone is suicidal, if someone has a mental health problem, they oftentimes would have to go to someplace like San Antonio. And with the growing population in this region, with the profound mental health challenges that were discussed with us, one takeaway I had was that there is a greater need for a physical mental health care facility in this region. But we know that buildings don't treat people, people treat people. And so there needs to be more personnel, more strategies, a greater understanding by the mental health care provider community about what the needs are, and they will be best equipped to know the best way to provide, or let's say meet those needs. Bottom line is this, and that is, I think it's a fair statement, that legislative leaders understand about health challenges in the more rural settings in the state of Texas, and we have a genuine commitment to help address those mental health care challenges. It's one of those issues that was widely discussed in the last several sessions, in particular in the 2019 session. And pretty much every issue was raised by one legislator or another about potential ways to address shootings like this. And the consensus arose around those 17 bills that I did sign, that they hardened schools, they made schools safer, they addressed mental health, and issues like that were the solutions that were agreed upon by legislators at that time. And that is going to be the similar approach that I perceive legislators will continue to focus on. We consider that what we did in 2019 to be one of the most profound legislative sessions, not just in Texas, but we've seen in any state in addressing school shootings. That said, to be clear, we all understand our work is not done. Our work must continue. And we will continue to discuss with legislators about all the potential avenues and pathways that we can take to make sure that schools will be even safer going forward. And I know people like to try to oversimplify this. Let's talk about some real facts. And that is, there are, quote, real gun laws in Chicago. There are, quote, real gun laws in New York. There are real gun laws in California. I hate to say this, but there are more people who were shot every weekend in Chicago than there are in schools in Texas. And we need to realize that people who think that, well, maybe if we just implement tougher gun laws, it's going to solve it. Chicago and LA and New York disprove that thesis. And so if you're looking for a real solution, Chicago teaches that what you're talking about is not a real solution. Our job is to come up with real solutions that we can implement.
Back on that, Governor Adams, with the 17 laws that you said you signed, and in the context of those laws, and I agree with Lieutenant Governor Adams about that there's always going to be evil, there's always going to be a necessity for law enforcement with good names and families and people. So in the context of those laws, is there a plan to secure schools more readily with the fencing and security guards? Because the fences around here are very low, easy access. One of the things that you said about one-point entry, I know where in the district where my children go to school, we have a one-point entry in Harper, Texas. And I have family down here that were affected by this yesterday, and so that's why I'm here today. And so within the context of those 17 laws, is there a plan to address real security safety? Is there funds for it to apply to that?
So the last thing first, and that is all together, we allocated more than $600 million, so more than $500 million to address school safety. As it concerns the first parts of your question, the answer is, with the laws that we passed in 2019, which is 3 years ago, all those measures that you were talking about were included in those laws. Let me give you several examples. An entire platform that was addressed is what's called school hardening or hardening schools. Some of those strategies reduce the number of entrances. Other strategies provide things like school marshals or having DPS officers or others fill out their paperwork in schools so that there will be a law enforcement presence in schools. They involve different types of strategies that will make it, should make it more difficult for a shooter to get into a school. That said, I can tell you what we all agree upon. We're all going to go back and look at both exactly what was passed, any shortcoming in what was passed, any shortcoming in implementation. I want you to know also that included in those laws were requirements by school districts across the state of Texas to work with the School Safety Commission to make sure that all the strategies would be used and employed and tested, including active shooter strategies for schools to be ready, to be prepared to employ as needed. And so, yes, from pretty much every angle, it was debated. And let me go back in time. This is something where I began working up the governor's plan to respond to this a year in advance.
We will continue to monitor the Q&A portion of this press conference we are seeing here in Texas with Governor Abbott and other government and law enforcement officials talking about what, why, and how to prevent something like this from ever happening again just a little over 24 hours from the second deadliest school shooting in U.S. history. I want to point out here behind me, there is a growing memorial here on the Robb Elementary School sign. You see people have come to lay flowers, candles, balloons, paying their respects to the lives lost, the 21 lives lost. I want to turn now to our investigative reporter, Aaron Katersky, because we heard a lot in that press conference, Aaron, talk about what were the warning signs. We heard Governor Abbott said there weren't any real meaningful warning signs ahead of time. He spoke, of course, of the need of more mental health resources, but he also mentioned these social media posts that happened moments before shots were fired. Talk about what law enforcement has been able to uncover right now and what they're still looking for.
Amy, they've taken a look at some private messages posted to Facebook that indicated the gunman was going to shoot his grandmother, followed by a post a short time later that said, "I shot my grandmother." And as Governor Abbott quoted during the press conference, one about 15 minutes before the massacre began, saying, "I'm going to shoot an elementary school." We're told that authorities are still trying to figure out whether this particular school was the intended target or whether after crashing his car, it was a target of opportunity. The authorities have also been scouring other social media posts, and they've been finding signs of some violent content, including photos of guns that were shared with other users and an apparent history of animal abuse, including videos that the gunman seems to have been posting rather openly. And you heard Governor Abbott there say the suspect had no diagnosed history of mental health, but law enforcement told us that they are picking up signs of anger, isolation, and truancy, indicators that were there, even if they were not recognized in advance, Amy.
I want to bring in Chief Justice Correspondent Pierre Thomas on this issue as well, because we heard Governor Abbott and so many other officials there praising the bravery and the courage of first responders running into the sound of ringing bullets. But when you look back at what they could have known based on maybe perhaps just some of these very initial social media posts that really didn't give a lot of time for law enforcement to react. But how does law enforcement go about distinguishing between someone who's just ranting on social media and someone who is really intended to create harm in the way this young man was?
Well, Amy, what you're talking about is connecting the dots. You need a holistic approach in which someone would have needed to connect the information that may develop about the animal abuse, to connect it to the issue of truancy, to figure out what was going on in the home. But I do think that what was pointed out at the press conference about these Facebook posts that came just 30 minutes before the attack, the fact that he talked about, "I'm going to shoot my grandmother," then posted, "I shot my grandmother," and then made this signal that he was going to an elementary school, showed that this young man had an intention to kill children.
And Pierre, I'm curious, though, in terms of resources, do law enforcement have the resources they need to monitor people like this in the way they have to prevent tragedies like this?
Amy, I think what we're seeing time and time again is that the question is follow-up. Is information being provided by school officials or family members to law enforcement? And the initial encounter may not be enough. You may have to follow up. And what we're seeing over and over again, as we saw in Buffalo, are situations where there's information that comes out. It seems negative, it seems concerning. The question is there enough follow-up? And then something to flag the system that says, hey, this person who's exhibiting disturbing behavior just went in and bought an assault rifle.
And you would think the people who perhaps knew him best were the people who he was living with. I want to bring in Chief National Correspondent Matt Gutman, because, Matt, you were able to talk to the gunman's grandfather. And notably, his wife, the gunman's grandmother, he shot her. She is thankfully doing well, at least considering her wounds, in the hospital right now. But what did he have to say about this young man? And were there warning signs? And did he ever have any indication that his grandson was capable of violence like this?
Amy, there seem to be two very different stories here. One is from the family itself, specifically the grandfather. The other is from classmates, neighbors, and friends. The grandfather says he saw no warning signs. There was one big blaring warning sign that he didn't take, I guess, seriously enough, and that is truancy. His son did not go to school basically at all this year, he said. Another friend of this young man told me that he was in sophomore classes, even though he was supposed to graduate technically this week from high school, but he never went to school. Truancy is a big red sign. The grandfather didn't notice that the son had started wearing all black, that he had been on social media posting these messages, that he had allegedly purchased these weapons and stockpiled ammunition in the room right in the front of this house where he slept. Grandfather said he never noticed these things. He didn't think that his grandson was going to do something like this or would ever have committed violence. In fact, the grandfather said that he is a felon, which means he is not allowed, he is prohibited by law to live in a house where there is a firearm. So he said he would have reported his grandson had he known. He didn't know. Now, this is what the friends and neighbors say. 5 classmates with whom I spoke, 12 at least neighbors say that this was a kid who was a troublemaker. He hurt animals. He scared people. He stalked girls and boys online. One of the neighbors who was the same age and had gone to middle school with him and high school said that the suspect threatened to kill him because he had stopped being friends with him, that he would text him when this boy was at school. The suspect would text him when the boy was at school, telling him what clothes he was wearing and what class he was in, even though the suspect wasn't at school. He had bullied other girls. He had picked fights with people. He had posted all of this online. And this is the kind of thing, Amy, that should have been picked up, one would hope, one would suspect, long before law enforcement got involved. By teachers, by counselors, by parents, by the community. Somebody should have noted that this kid was in big trouble, that he was crying out for help. But all of those warning signs were missed, Amy.
Yeah, as Pierre said, you've got to connect the dots. Matt, thank you. I want to turn finally now to ABC's Maria Villarreal. She has been here at the very beginning, and you have been talking, Maria, to the family, to the friends, to those who lost those nearest and dearest to them. Tell us what this community is dealing with, where they go from here, what your sense of where we are just a little over 24 hours from this tragedy.
You know, right now, Amy, there is still a lot of sadness and a lot of disbelief in what exactly has happened. And now that has truly turned into tension and anger. And you could feel it in this room today as the press conference was going on. From the moment that people started to take the stage, the governor, you could just feel people were ready and itching to ask him questions about how this could have happened. Why didn't we see this coming? Could have this been prevented? And then obviously, while we were here, we saw governor candidate Beto O'Rourke come up to the stage, rush the stage, and then call out Governor Abbott and some of the people on the stage, saying that they were to blame for this because of their inactions here to do more to figure things out when something like this happens, to have stricter gun laws in place. He also talked about the El Paso shooting and Latinos in this community and how they have suffered. So right now, I think everybody is looking for an answer and trying to figure out, could this have prevented, and why didn't anybody say anything?
Those are the questions, indeed, Maria, and we will continue to follow all of the latest here on the ground here in Texas. Of course, you can follow ABC News Live throughout the day for updates. This is obviously a situation that is fresh, it is raw, emotions are high, and people are suffering and in pain. And yes, they want to know why, but mostly they want to know how we can stop the violence, how we can stop this, how we can prevent it. So we will continue to follow all of these developments throughout the day. We should mention ABC News' David Muir and his entire team is on the ground here in Texas. They will bring this all to you live on a special World News tonight. Stay tuned for that. In the meantime, though, have a good afternoon.
This has been a special report from ABC News.